105.9 Academy FM.
The sound of Folkestone.
Hi, I'm Lenny, and I've come to Whitstable to talk to Phil from Animate and Create. How good at drawing do you have to be to make graphics for a game?
See, I don't know too much about the game industry because that's something I haven't really got into, but primarily I think it helps to be good at drawing, but most of in terms of character design, that's up to people who are specialised, who can draw, and it's up to them to create characters and such, and it's then up to people called the modelers who know how to make things in sort of programs to interpret that in a kind of a 3D environment. So yeah, I think it would help, but it helps to be good at drawing because you can understand kind of the proportions of the human body, how it kind of all sort of looks together, and you can kind of you're more likely to get it right. But I don't think it's incredibly important.
Do they use the same animation tricks in films as in computer games?
Yeah, I mean, generally, regardless of whether it's a film or a computer game, it all sort of starts in the same way, in that you've got a character in a computer program and he needs to be animated. So yeah, whether it's there are a couple of programs. There's Maya, which I've used before. There's Studio 3D. There's Blender, which is free. But either way, it's the same kind of process to actually animate the characters, sort of whether in film or video games. So as I said, you start off with your the concept art, and then that's modelled in a 3D environment. So you've got a character on the computer screen. It then needs to be rigged, which is when you kind of go inside and give it a kind of a virtual bone structure, so you can pose it and move the limbs around. And once you've got a rig sorted for your character, it's then up to the animators to kind of manipulate it and move it around in such a way, sort of making it strike sort of key poses to animate it. So yeah, that's sort of the sort of rough process that you go through to actually make a character animated.
Can you have a physical model, or you do all this on a computer?
Certainly professional studios, certainly I know Pixar do it a lot. When they get their concept art done, they'll get physical sculptors to build like 3D models of your character or whatever. But when it comes to actually animating it, that's more for reference rather than sort of animation purposes. So yeah, the animation takes place entirely within kind of a virtual environment.
If you make it look too real, does it make it difficult to play the game?
See, that one's a tricky one as well, because that's more about kind of, I suppose, morals, isn't it? Because games are getting more and more realistic now. And certainly with kind of there's the PS4 coming out, or the new next generations, and the kind of realism is incredible in them. But I mean, I suppose it all depends on kind of what they're aiming for. A game that's an 18 can be very realistic, because obviously the people who are playing it are kind of old enough to understand that it's all virtual and fake. But it's a tricky one, really. Haven't really given it much thought.
Does it become a problem when, if it looks too real, it's not actually animation? Why would there be a point of animating something if it looks so real? You could have just used real people, couldn't you?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I guess it depends on kind of. If certainly in games anyway, you always are controlling a character, and as such, you don't have a kind of a defined sort of set of movements or whatever. So, for example, you know, if it was real people in a film, you know, acting, then they could only ever do what they were filmed to do. But with a game, it needs to be virtual because it's up to the player to decide what he wants the character to do.
Would killing a person be harder if it looked more real?
See, that's that again, tricky one. Because I think certainly for my generation and obviously yours, you'd have kind of grown up with video games. You know, I mean, I'm 25, nearly 25, so kind of, you know, when I was growing up, video games still looked quite fake. But if you grow up with it, I think you are more aware of it being kind of, you are aware it's a virtual environment, it's not real. You know, as you get older, you kind of realise that. You know, and I think that's the key difference, I suppose. If you know, if someone who hadn't played video games at all went in and wasn't aware of them, went in and saw like a really realistic video game of someone dying, they'd be quite shocked. But because you've had that, you've grown up with them, and you're aware of them being fake and, you know, virtual, then I think it's I don't know. I don't think it would be too bad.
You're sort of conditioned to it.
Not well, conditioned sounds so bad, but and so does desensitized. I guess you're just used to it, I guess. But yeah.
What's the process of getting pictures to move?
So is this like your characters to move and such? Okay. Well, that was kind of what I was saying earlier. You basically kind of, it's quite a long process. I'll go into more detail. So yeah, you get once you've got your concept art, that your illustrators have made a character for you to design. It's then up to the modelers to go into Maya or whatever program they're using, and then construct, you know, a person by. You can actually do it a couple of ways, but there's a program called Mudbox, which is like a virtual pottery wheel in a way. So you can actually sculpt it like it was clay. It's kind of fun because it means you can. It's what's called organic modelling, because it's quite a much more. It's not the end product looks much more kind of organic than has it been kind of, you know, modelling in Maya, which is quite 3D, kind of very kind of everything's very square and, you know, rigid, I suppose. So yeah, once you've got your model done, it's then passed on to riggers, who, as I said, whose job it is to basically is to sort of fill the thing with a skeleton. So it means you can pose it. Now it's quite a long process, that is, because basically what they also need to do is to kind of make sure a joint is only really affecting the skin around it. So sometimes it's a bit inaccurate. So when you've kind of done a preliminary rig, you know, a character, you can lift up a character's arm, and all of a sudden the side of his body will just stretch out with it, because the computer can't distinguish between what's what. So it's then up to the kind of riggers to go in and kind of tell the computer that, you know, the arm is only this bit, you know, it's only the arm and not anything else. And then then it's passed on to the animators who just go through the process of animating whatever it needs to kind of do, I suppose, whether it's sort of, you know, for games or films.
You have to have an understanding of how the human body moves to make it look as lifelike as possible.
No, that's very true, very true. I mean, a lot of the Pixar animators are naturally quite silly people, because what they do is they'll just get up and they'll act out the movements themselves, and then, you know, record them, or, you know, they'll get a friend to do it, and so they can study how people move in real life to try and replicate that movement in the computer.
And when they laugh, I've got a picture of Woody from Toy Story in my head, and he's kind of and laughing and throwing their head back and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
and
really...
it's so and similarly, actually, certainly in Cars, I know they did this. They look at the voice actors and they try and replicate the kind of mannerisms of the voice actors who did it. So Michael Caine in Cars 2, and I can't remember who else, but yeah, that's, you kind of get the idea that it's all about kind of, because it is a 3D environment. You've got to make sure there's kind of an audience can engage with the characters, and the only way of doing, not the only way of doing that, but one of the sort of easiest ways of doing that is to try and make them as human as possible. And so yeah, it's very much to do with trying to mimic human movements.
And that whole scratching thing, when people talk, they scratch or rub their ear. You're doing it now,
Yeah.
but it's getting that sort of mannerisms into the
kind of individual kind of idiosyncrasies, to, as you say, mannerisms to kind of just to give them that kind of extra bit of detail to make it more believable.
Are there times when you don't work so hard to make it lifelike?
I guess that all depends on the kind of, on what you're making it for, really. You think about, you mentioned Toy Story. Even though they're kind of humanoid characters mostly, their movements are quite exaggerated because they're toys and they don't actually have kind of a physical bone structure, and so their movements are quite big and more exaggerated than maybe a human's would be, but then at the same time, if you're doing an animation for example, Planet of the Apes, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, that needs to be hyper realistic, because what you're making are monkeys in a real environment, and if their movements are too exaggerated, the audience will just click on that and they won't engage with it because they won't look realistic. And that's why motion capture is very kind of popular in kind of in making a sort of a film with 3D effects. Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and again Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Andy Serkis did all of the motion capture for that, because the easiest way to create a realistic movement is to actually have a human person act out it, and then have the movements digitized into a computer. So yeah, it all really sort of depends on what the actual finished product is, really.
Can you explain in a bit more detail what motion capture is?
Okay, so basically, a motion capture actor will dress in a huge kind of suit, like a really sort of skin tight suit, on which there are I can't remember exactly how many. There are about 50 or 60 sensors all across the body in sort of kind of symmetrical positions. So you've got feet, legs, where the joints are basically, really, and they're put in a motion capture studio, on which there are, I think, 9 cameras all pointing down in a central square. Now, the sensors that I mentioned, they're kind of very reflective, like balls, really small reflective balls. So what happens is the sensors, the cameras, are all looking at the motion capture actor and can see light reflecting off of the motion capture sensors, the balls, and because they pick up on that, they can then interpret it, kind of because there's so many of them all looking sort of at one point. They can then work out together where all of these sensors are in relation to each other, and therefore can kind of interpret it as a sort of a humanoid-looking character in a computer screen. So, and once you've got that, then it means you've got a bunch of data. Once you've actually recorded your motion capture sort of footage, you've got data that is a almost identical replication of what your actor's doing.
Thanks very much, Phil.
That's all right.